Hello again, YouTube. Today, we'd like to go over the topic of arrays. We're not going to go into multi-dimensional arrays or arrays of arrays in this episode. We're just going to begin the introductory level of arrays and also the for loop, but first arrays. So we have here our past project that we've been working with. Let's clear everything out of the main method here. And we still have these functions. We can leave them for now. That's fine. That's whatever. Let's have for ourselves a array declaration. But before we make this array, let's talk about what even an array is. Here I am, some madman, talking to you about arrays, and you're just sitting here like, look, I just need to know. So you can kind of understand the issue already with variables. You might end up having to make a lot of variables. You might make like name and age and height, inches, and you'll make all these different variables, and sometimes you find yourself in this position where you have like num1, num2, num3, num4, and you're like, there has to be an easier way to do this, right? Because sometimes the variables are very repetitive, like this right here, like these ones. Sometimes it's extremely repetitive. And what are you supposed to do about that? Well, there's a lot of ways to reduce the amount of code that you type, and one way is to see if that code can't be shoved into an array. And you can think of an array like a collection of related things, right? You can think of them as a list, you can think of them as a collection, you can think of them as a series. And every array has a set number of elements of things in that array, right? A number of items. And they are of fixed length. You cannot increase the length of an array or decrease the length of the array. You can, however, change individual elements of that array. You can do that. And you can also work with arrays in a way that is iterative, which is why I introduced the earlier topic of loops, because this is going to be relevant for this. These topics build on each other. So let's talk about arrays. Let's create an array. How do you create an array? Well, we're going to create an array of integers. I just chose integers because integers are really cool, right? So we have an integer, right? This is how you make a normal integer variable, right? Int h equals 0. That's cool. Very epic. But that's not especially wowing anyone at this point. What we need to do is to make a collection of these. So let's try int. This time, when writing it, we're going to put square brackets, yes, and then array equals new int, and we'll write new int and then 5. What does 5 mean? 5 means there are 5 elements in this array of integers. So let's go through this, right? Let's make a while loop and a counter variable, int count equals 0. And while count is less than 5, we're going to output, in a sense, the value of every element of the array, right? Just to show that we can do it. And the way you access individual elements of this array that is of length 5, the way we do that is we say array, and then we select its current index. The way we do that, we use an iterator, right? Like how we used an iterator to keep track of the current iteration of a loop. We can do that here, right? Of course, in the same way, you have to increase the iterator as well. So count plus plus. And you get the impression, you're thinking about this, and you're like, this is really arcane. I mean, we have to use square brackets to select the index. Arrays have indexes. Bear with me, all right? Let's run this. And what do you know? Every element of this array is equal to 0. Okay, not especially exciting. To make this a little more illuminating, I'm going to do a little bit of string concatenation here. So we're going to output the current. We're going to output the value of count for each iteration of this loop, right? For every time this loop goes through, we're going to output the current iteration number. We're going to put a space, and then we're going to output the actual value of that element in the array, of the index in the array. So we've got a little bit more information. So the 0th element is equal to 0. The first element is equal to 0. The second element is equal to 0. The third element is equal to 0. The fourth element is equal to 0. And you're like, wait, what happened to the fifth? Well, the thing is about arrays and computers is they tend to count from 0 instead of from 1. And we do have 5 elements still. No, notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This array has 5 elements. How about we make this array more interesting, right? Well, remember how I mentioned that you can interact with arrays in an iterable manner, not just outputting them? Well, in the same way that we're able to, output the value of said array, we can also make assignment. We can change individual elements of an array. We can make it equal to something. So, just for kicks, let's make every element equal to 5. I'm gonna make count equal to 0 down here. Let's try this, right? Oh, it looks exactly the same. Why is that? Because I changed the element. I changed the element's value, each element, 5, but only after I've outputted what it was. So that's not going to help us. So maybe I should move this before then, right? Okay, now they're all equal to 5. Well, that's really impactful. Wow, amazing. Bear with me. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that, and I'm going to go over here, make another while loop. While count is less than 5. Array count. Whoops. Actually, there we go. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. And of course, remember you have to count up so that this condition works. And so note, it does what it seems to have done before, but the outputting is happening in a separate loop down here after this loop has completed. Okay. What if this array wasn't of length 5, but of length 15? How should things work? Well, hold on. It's only outputting the first 5 elements. But there should be, in truth, how many elements? There we go. That's how we get the length of an array. So if we want to get the length of an array, we type array.length. If it's, that is, of course, if it is a primitive, this, we'll see how things are. So it is, in fact, 15, but we're not looking at 15 values. We're looking at 5. How do we solve this problem? Well, we could just write 15, and that should solve our issues. And you'll see that when I changed it in both places, it also affected this. What if, instead of writing 15 though, instead of hard coding the value, we wrote array.length? Yeah? That looks better, doesn't it? Now we got it. It's perfect. So now I can change this to like 90 and it would still work just fine. Now, preparing a use of these while loops for going through arrays, for iterating over arrays, is a little bit of a hassle. I mean, we have to specify a count variable, and then we have to set up the condition, and then we have to make sure the count is going blah 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 blah, and then if we want to use this, if we want to do it again, we have to like reset the count variable. It's horrible. We should be instead taking advantage of things like scope. For example, if I declared a variable inside of this loop, for example, string name equal, I don't know, it doesn't have to equal anything, and if I try to refer to name outside of the loop, it'll be kind of confused. It'll be like, what the heck? What the heck? If I try to output the name variable, it won't know what I'm talking about. Right out here, outside of this loop. Even though I defined it in the loop beforehand, it doesn't know what it is outside of the loop because of something called scope, right? And we can take advantage of scope. It allows us, for example, to have temporary variables. This variable right here, name, is basically, in a sense, a temporary variable. It only exists within the context of this loop. So with this concept of scope, we can actually take advantage of it and use it for our own ends to make our code a little cleaner. So let's get rid of all this. Let's introduce a new type of loop. I've shown you while and do while, right? Those are nice. Now let me introduce to you this new kind of loop. It's called for loop, right? Distinct from while loops and do while loops in one main way. So for loops are very common. People use these a lot, and you'll see why. So the syntax for loop is you write for, parentheses, int, and then your counter variable, your counting variable. In this case, I'll just write count equal to 0, right? Count, and you could say array, or less than array dot length, semicolon again, and then count plus plus. So this is a for loop, right? And it's the same syntax as what we had done before, or it does the same thing as the while loop that I was showing you before that I was using to iterate through the array. But it's very much self-contained. This count variable exists only within the context of this for loop. Outside it, I can create another for loop right outside it that uses the same variable name, but because this variable only exists within the context of the loop, it doesn't interfere with this one, because these are two separate loops. So we've got here our for loop, and inside said for loop, we can iterate over the elements of this array. So we can say array count in the same way that we had before to output the elements of the array, and we can also mess with elements as we had before. In fact, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to create another whoops. I'm going to create another over here, so I'm going to say array count equals, I don't know, every element of this array gets to be equal to 7 for some reason. Or maybe 7 times count. Ooh, that's interesting. Very spicy. Let's see how this ends up. This way we're sure to get different values. So this is outputting the contents of the set array. And the content, each element is equal to 7 times the iterator, which in this case is called count, and it course, the first element count is equal to 0. 7 times 0 is 0. And then 7, 14, 21, 28, etc., etc. You get the point. This is how we can use for loops, really loops in general, to attack the array problem, which is fundamentally an iterative problem. This will become very handy in the future. So this is how you create an array of a specified size. You can also, there's another way of creating arrays. You can say array, and do it. You could do it like this, and directly specify the elements, what the elements are equal to. And this way, you don't actually have to specify a size because it figures out the size based on the number of elements. But after this is defined, of course, the size is final. You can't change the size of the array. You can only change the individual elements or just create a new array. Anyway, I hope that was informative.